I'm ready.
All right. Hi, everyone. Thank you for coming out tonight. So we're here with Julie Clark and Nicola Harrison to celebrate the launch of Hotel Laguna. So congratulations, Nicola.
Thank you.
So it's going to be about 30 minutes of conversation followed by audience Q&A and then a book signing. So whenever you both are ready.
All right.
Perfect.
So congratulations on your release.
Thank you.
Has it been crazy? Are you just like running all over the place?
Yes, it's been a lot.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's been kind of crazy. My son today was like, I'm really glad you don't have like a real job where you do this all the time and you like work like a lot. I'm like, well, okay, thanks.
Yeah. Where are you going after this?
After this, tomorrow I'm doing an event in Malibu.
Okay.
And then I'm going to San Diego for Warwick's.
Oh,
And then I have a little break, and then the week after 4th of July, I'm going to the East Coast. South Carolina, Florida, Delaware. Yeah, all that fun stuff, which is right where you want to be in August. And I mean in July.
Exactly. All right, so Hotel Laguna, I read it in probably a day, maybe two, because children need to eat. But it was completely absorbing. So before I go too far into my questions, tell everybody what the book is about.
Okay.
Just give us your little pitch.
Okay. So Hotel Laguna takes place in 1946, and it follows the story of Hazel Francis. And she has moved from Wichita, Kansas to Los Angeles, California to work for Douglas Aircraft during World War II. And she's working as a Rosie the Riveter, helping build airplanes. And she loves the job. She's thriving in the position. And then the war ends, and the men come back and take their jobs back, and they tell the ladies, "Thanks very much, ladies. Now go back to being a housewife and a mother." But Hazel doesn't have a home or a family really to go back to. She's not a mom, and so she ends up in Laguna Beach, and she ends up taking a job with a famous, but kind of cantankerous old artist named Hanson Radcliffe as like his assistant and model. And so she gets very involved in the art world down in Laguna Beach. And her boss has a scandal that's haunting him from his past that involves a Hollywood star. And so Hazel kind of becomes determined to sort of uncover some of the mystery behind this scandal. And she meets a very handsome bartender who works at the Hotel Laguna. She tries to enlist him. But ultimately, it's a story of love and determination and the realization that one small decision can change your life in the most unexpected way.
And second chances, I would say.
And second
right?
chances,
like
too, yeah.
Starting over again.
Yeah.
I think so. So the Douglas Aircraft part was I was super excited because my grandfather actually moved to California from Pennsylvania to work at Douglas Aircraft.
No way.
And so I was texting my mom like, "What did Pep up to? When did you get, and she's like, why are you asking that? But I, anytime there's like a real life connection, I was so fascinated by that. So what drew you to the idea, like, there's a lot of World War II books out there, and you came at it from a completely different direction and focused on not the women fighting on the front or the women, the nurses, or, we've read those books,
right.
But like, I've not read, and I consider myself to be fairly well read in historical fiction, nothing about the women here and what they did to kind of pick up the slack while all the men were gone. So what drew you to that?
So it started with a place. It started with Laguna Beach because it was COVID. It was the early days of COVID, and I was like, well, first of all, I had a 1-year-old at home who was just starting to walk, and I had a 9-year-old who was attempting to do remote school, and I was like, I'm never going to be able to write again. And then, but my husband and I worked out these like 2-hour shifts. So he would do 2 hours with the kids and I would do 2 hours with upstairs working. And then we would kind of switch off. So in one of those 2-hour shifts, I was like, what am I going to write next? And I can't really travel for real physical research. So where do I want to be in my imagination for the next couple of years, 1.5, 2 years, however long it takes me to write this book. And I kept coming back to Laguna Beach because I have a lot of fond memories of Laguna. I lived there after college. I had, my first apartment there where I didn't have roommates. I had my first salaried job, and so it was like my first taste of independence. but also my parents are both artists. So my dad does oil paintings and my mom does watercolor, and they both exhibited in Laguna Beach in the galleries and the festivals there. So I was like, all right, I can include some of this behind the scenes art knowledge that I have and everything. And then I settled on the time period of the 40s, and I started learning about these women who had worked on the home front during the war. Like 6 million women did this, came and took these positions that they had never had the opportunity to do before. And I started reading up on it, and I talked to my husband about it one night. I was like, yeah, this is what I did in my 2-hour shift today. I read about this, it's really cool, it's really interesting. And he's like, oh yeah, my grandma did that. Grandma Ruth, I think she did that. And I was like, what? How come you didn't tell me that? And so, so then I started speaking to his mom, my mother-in-law.
Did she?
So yeah, she did. Wow. Grandma Ruth was a Rosie the Riveter, but she's no longer alive. So I spoke to my husband's mother, and she remembered all of her stories. She had like asked her and everything. So that's where it took off. Yeah. That's where it started to take off.
That's fun. I love it when that happens.
Yeah, like a real life connection.
So you stole my second question. That's fine. It just said the book in the beginning. But we'll move on. Let's talk about Hazel, your main character. She's bold, she's fearless, she's single, which was sort of frowned upon in the 40s. Not Florida, but it really was. And she has no desire to get married. She has no desire to be a mother. She just wants to work.
Yeah.
So what is it that like had you create her in that way? Like, you didn't have her, lose her husband. You didn't have her, as a single mother trying to like support her children.
Right.
Nothing like that. Like, what made you craft her in this independent sort of rebellious way?
So I think I was mostly fascinated when I started learning about these women who worked at these airplane factories and ammunition factories and things like that, that when they took these jobs, that afterwards they were told kind of like, all right, thank you, we're done with you, we don't need you anymore. And a lot of them didn't, they missed it. They really like loved the work, and they didn't want to go back to these traditional roles. And so I wanted to capture that in her. And also once I found out that Grandma Ruth was a Rosie the Riveter, then I started doing some digging, and I found that there's a Rosie the Riveter Association, American Rosie the Riveter Association, with chapters all over the country. And their whole mission is to celebrate and preserve the legacy of these women who've worked in these jobs. And they connected me with these 3 elderly women who were Rosies, and they live in Anaheim at a senior living home. And it was Phyllis, who's 102. It was Helen, who's 95, and Rusty, who's 90. And they were so sharp. They were so amazing. And I got to sit and interview them for a few hours. I don't even know if this is answering your question, but they inspired me.
What parts of their meanings the book? I need to know.
A lot. So one of them, they told me like what they did. And one of them worked this hydraulic press. There's this huge piece of machinery that pulls down, and it like molds the sheets of aluminum of the side of the airplane. And then, one of the others was a riveter. So she like used the massive rivet guns, and there was like a bucker opposite her. And she did all that. And the other one said that she was very petite. So they put her like in the nose of the aircraft, where she would do like, which is jobs that are like kind of perfect for women.
Yeah.
Because they're, and so it was just funny. Oh, and then the government, they put out these posters to lure women to take on these roles. Well, you've all seen that, like, you can do it.
Yeah.
We can do it. But they also put these other ones out that were like, using a hydraulic press is just like ironing. You can do it, ladies. And, and using a rivet gun to sew is just like sewing. It's just like sewing. So it was like so funny how they kind of like talked down to them like they weren't capable.
Right, you had to sell it on the.
If
it's like housework,
like
then
housework,
please sign me up. You describe a test that they have, like when she goes for the job, she does this sort of like, it's like a tryout.
Yes.
Did the women tell you about that?
Yes, that was one thing. Thank you. That was one thing that
I love that part.
Yes, it was like a test. I mean, I think that they would take on almost any of these women because they needed the woman power. But it depended on where they put them in the factory. And so they had them do this bucking test where like one person stands up, the bucker stands opposite you, and then the riveter stands here, and it's like how fast you can basically fasten these bits of metal together, and then that determines like how good your job is. Because there were also jobs like, picking up all the stuff off the floor and all those extra screws and then reusing them, all that kind of stuff.
Really cool.
Yeah.
Really, really cool. Is she based? So Hazel, is she, of all the people you interviewed, including Grandma Ruth?
Yeah.
Who is she most like? Do you think? Which one?
So the beginning of her story, that she moves from Wichita, Kansas to California, is like Grandma Ruth. But then after that, it just kind of goes off.
Was Grandma Ruth single when she came?
She was.
On the run?
No, she her sister's husband got transferred from an airplane factory in Wichita to California, and so then her sister started working in the airplane factory, and she called her and she was like, Ruth, the jobs like pay really well and they're looking for women, you should move out here. So she moved to stay with her and did it.
And how old was she?
Oh,
we're not talking about Grandma Ruth. The book is fine. It's great. So how old?
She was like 19. Yeah.
Okay. All right. So the other character in here that I loved was Hanson Radcliffe, the artist, who's cantankerous and a bit of a drunk.
Yeah.
And
a little bit.
Like I could just he just was so vivid. And what really captured me, was the missing painting.
Oh yeah.
That is so not only are we immersed in this like historical world and kind of a view of World War II that we don't really get very often, but now we have a missing painting and there's a mystery. And as soon as that comes in, I was like, well, here we go. Popcorn for dinner, boys. Yeah. So tell me, is he based on anybody?
So he's not. There are these the whole California Impressionist art movement that I read up on, and there's all these artists that was based in Laguna Beach, like Edgar Payne and William Wendt and Anita Hills, who are these like famous artists from the California Impressionist movement. And they painted in these broad strokes, and they were very inspired by the California sunlight. So they would paint like oceans that were purple and palm trees that were burnt orange because of this. That's how they saw it with the sunlight. So, I incorporated some of those characteristics and some of those artists into him, but he's not based on anyone particular. Because then I felt if I based him on a particular artist, I'd have to be true to their story,
right.
And I wouldn't have the creative freedom to make him be such a drunk and all that.
Well, and also like what happened. I won't, no spoilers, but what happened?
What happens? Yeah.
So you'll have to read the book and find out. Yeah. So what kind of research did you do besides just knowing who the artists were? Because your family is a family of artists. Like, what kind of research did you have to do that you didn't know? So you had a lot of connections to the story, a lot of threads through your husband's family, through your family. Yeah. But like, where did you have to like stop and say, okay, I'm gonna have to like do some learning now?
So this might ruin one of your next questions, but did you think about the Pageant of the Masters?
Yes, but anyway, go ahead.
So the Pageant of the Masters, I had to study up on that. So
okay.
I'm assuming that have you guys heard of the Pageant of the Masters? How many people have been to the Pageant of the Masters?
I never heard of it until this book, but
really?
I feel like I was like, there was a little bit in the back of my head of like, I've heard of these things happening before, but not on the one in Laguna.
Right.
Okay, so tell them about
the Pageant of the Masters, for those who don't know, it takes place in Laguna Beach. It's this year, they're celebrating their 90th year, and they create these tableaux vivants, like living pictures, and they're like life-size, the size of a stage, and they recreate these famous works of art, classic and contemporary, with real people in them, which sounds strange, but with the costumes and the makeup and the lighting, they trick your eyes into thinking that you're looking at this two-dimensional famous piece of artwork that you recognize because from being famous. And it's just the most unique production, and they have a live orchestra that's playing, and there's this narrator who tells something about the painting or about the artist, and so it's just really cool. So I'd been to it. I think I went to it in high school, and then so I knew about it, but I had no idea that it had this history. It's been around for 90 years, and actually it started in 1932 when they had the LA Olympics going on here, and the artists were like, how can we get all those people who are in LA, all those tourists and visitors, how can we get them down to Laguna to know about our art? So the artists like opened their studio doors and they put on a very amateurish version of the Pageant of the Masters. It was like a large picture frame with someone behind it, like posing in I don't know what painting. But then as the years went on, it got better and better. And then of course they had the artists living in Laguna who volunteered to make it a more professional production, and they were painting the backdrops and everything, and it became like this amazing production. And by 1941, it was so anticipated, and there was so much talk about it. But then the next year, it had to shut down for World War II because you couldn't have. Well, first of all, there were barely any men around because they were all fighting, so you couldn't have men in the paintings. And then also you couldn't have large gatherings with lights and everything in case of enemy attack. So that shut down for 4 years, and then the only other year that it shut down was for COVID.
Wow.
So that's really what I really had to study up on and like figure out how they did it and how they made it all work.
When is it?
It's for 3 months during the summer, so it's July, August, and September.
3 months.
Yeah, only
Okay.
3 months. They start auditioning for people to be in it in January.
Uh-huh.
And in those 3 months, they attract 250,000 visitors a year. Yeah, isn't that crazy?
Mm.
And it's like they have 2,600 seats. It's in an amphitheater in Laguna Canyon, and it's just really cool.
Huh.
Yeah,
Wow.
who knew? And then the research that I did that was really great was I got to go to the Laguna Beach Library. Once COVID kind of eased up a little, and I could go to the library. I'd been emailing with this librarian in Laguna Beach, and she would send me articles, and she was so helpful and nice. But when I actually got to go there, she came out with this box, and she was like, "There might be something in here for you." And in there was the actual 1946 program of the Pageant of the Masters.
way.
So it had a listing of all the paintings they created that year, and all these advertisements of the stores and hotels and restaurants that were in town at that time,
Uh-huh.
which was,
So then you used it.
yes, I used it all.
Yes.
I put it all in there.
Except for one painting.
Yeah.
All right. So what draws you to historical fiction?
It's interesting. I love historical fiction. I've always been drawn to it. I always would read it, but I wasn't a history buff in high school or college. Like it wasn't like my subject. But I think now that I'm older, I'm fascinated with women's history and how women's roles have changed through the decades. And I think that's why I'm like selfishly, I'm like studying it for myself. But that's why I said a book, my showgirl is set in the 1920s. Women have just got the right to vote, and so there's like a flapper and independent women, and then Montauk in the 30s, and then Hotel Laguna in the 40s. So I just love learning that. And I think I also like historical fiction because I can create a story and it can be fictionalized, but I like having some boundaries, some sort of parameters of like, okay, well, this is what they could do in that time. So, and this is what they couldn't do, or this, historically, I like to have some boundaries.
Okay. So are you like working your way through the decades then?
Yeah, basically.
You are. So
I mean,
is
not intentionally.
Yeah.
But my next book is in the 50s. So.
Wow. And do you want to tell us a little bit about that?
Sure, but it might change because I'm working. I'm only about halfway through. But so it takes place in the 1950s. It's set on Balboa Island, which is only like 10 minutes away from Laguna Beach, but it's a totally different vibe.
Yeah.
And it's about 3 women who form a very unlikely friendship on the island. There's a woman who's like very well known. Everyone on the island knows her and loves her, and is her. And then there's a woman who's a mother of young children who's having a difficult marriage. And then there's a former disgraced tennis champion who's living as like a recluse on the island. And so the 3 of them form this unlikely friendship. Things happen.
I love that.
Things
I
happen.
love that. I love when, especially the tennis champion. That sounds so like, again, it's like the Douglas aircraft. Like, again, you're like taking something and turning it into the unexpected, which is always just so satisfying to read.
Yeah.
So how did you become a writer? Like, tell us a little bit about your path to being here in this seat.
Well, I published my first book in 2019, Montauk, but I was always drawn to writing, but I think it was probably mostly because I was trying to avoid math and science, So that's what it does. No, but I was, I was always taking the English and creative writing classes, and then right after college, I moved to New York. I went to UCLA, and then I moved to New York, and I worked in magazine publishing, and I was a style writer in New York. So I was writing for a living, and I loved it. But even then, I was taking a class on the side, or I was like taking a creative writing class on a weekend, and just always working towards, I guess, my first novel. But
So this was something you think you always wanted to do?
yeah, I also I grew up in England, and I lived on the same street as this woman called Margaret Margaret Reeves, and she was a pretty famous in England. She was a pretty famous children's book author. And I used to go over to her house all the time with like poems and short stories, and I'd be like, should I send this one to a publisher? Like, what do you think about this one? Is this one any good? And she'd be like,
I'm sure she loves it.
yeah. She was like, it's good, but like maybe just wait. Work on your craft. Maybe don't send it in just yet because you're like 7. But like keep working on it. And it was nice just to know her. I think knowing an author in real life made me feel like it was attainable somehow. I think that stayed with me.
So as you're writing these books across the decades, are there any themes that you keep returning to again and again and again?
Yes. And again, I don't even think it's intentional. It's not like I set out to do this, but I tend to write about strong, independent women. There's definitely feminist themes in my book. I just like to write about women who are trying to figure out where they fit in the world and who don't want to be boxed into a particular box. And so that seems to be what I keep coming back to.
What is the best part of writing for you? What is your favorite part?
That's a good question. I mean, well, my favorite part of writing a book is when you get towards the end, when you're like in the last third and you know what's going to happen, you know how it's going to end, and you're like racing towards it. It's like, yes, like the writing is just flowing. Unlike in the beginning sometimes when it's like, what's going to happen next? And it's like stressful. But yeah, I love getting towards the end.
And what's the hardest part about writing for you?
I think, I'm not really a planner. I mean, I'm a little bit of a planner. I sort of write myself a letter at the beginning when I'm writing a book. I'm like, okay, this is kind of what it's going to be about. I think I know generally where it's going to go. This is probably where it's going to end. And then I just start writing. And I think it's good for me because I like the creative flexibility it gives me. And sometimes characters come in that I don't know are going to be in the book. Or like in Montauk, for example, there's the best friend of the protagonist. I thought she was just going to like come in for a scene and then leave. But then I liked her so much and she had such a strong personality in the end that she ends up being a big part of the book. So I think that if I was a planner, it would stifle me a little bit. So I'm not, but I'm sort of like a mild planner maybe. But I think that that is hard for me. I would like to be a better planner, but I'm not. It's stressful sometimes. But I think people who, what do you like? What do you do?
I'm a little both.
A little both, yeah. But then there are the writers who know exactly what's coming in each chapter, what's coming in each scene in each chapter. And that sounds really amazing to me. I like
I feel like it would be really easy. You'd just be like, what's the assignment today?
I know. You're like, drop the kids off at school.
Right.
Okay,
I'm writing this chapter and this will happen. And okay, that can do that. That sounds super easy.
It sounds easy and peaceful, but it's just not who I am. I just,
Were there any characters in this book that you didn't think were going to be in it very long that ended up playing a bigger role?
I don't think so. I think these characters somehow, I think I knew who they were.
Okay.
Yeah.
What advice do you have for aspiring writers?
I would say the thing that's worked out great for me is I'm in a writing workshop. I moved to California 2.5 years ago, and before that I was in New York. So I was in a writing workshop there, and we would meet in real life every Thursday evening, and we would share 7 pages. We wouldn't share it beforehand. It was like none of that. It was just we would read it out loud and give each other our gut reaction. And that's always helped me stay accountable and stay on track and not go off in a direction where they're like, it's not good. So I like that weekly sort of touch base, especially since writing is a very, solitary act. Like you just sit at your laptop and just do it by yourself. So it's nice to have that connection once a week with other people about your writing. So I think I would recommend just finding other like-minded people who you can connect with on a weekly basis or bi-weekly basis.
I would agree with that.
Yeah.
I will open it up to questions. So knock yourself out.
So the program that you found from 1946,
Yeah.
did you put it on your website?
No, but I took pictures of it. I have it. I should.
You should. That would be so cool. I'd love to see
It
it.
would be
Yeah,
really
I mean, it was more than a program. It was more like a magazine. They had articles about how they put the whole show together, and then they had interviews with artists at the time, and it's really cool. I have the whole thing. I could.
Yeah, do it on your website as an extra bonus
Extra
material.
bonus, I
That would be
like
so much
that.
fun.
Yeah.
I have a question. Hi, I'm from New York also.
Oh, hi.
And I'm a writer, but would you carry your characters from a decade to another decade? Or use one character and bring it through the years?
You were just asking me that. My friend was just asking me that. I mean, that's a great idea. Like, I like it. I like the idea, but I haven't done it, and I haven't figured out yet how I would do it. But I like the idea, yeah. Especially because, like, I fall in love with these characters. You know, you get so attached to them. Be nice to bring them
I
back.
could revisit them.
Yeah.
Some of them might be grandparents.
Yes. Yeah.
That would be fun.
I have another question.
Yes.
So how much influence do people you meet play into your characters? Or do you draw from different people, little different
Yeah.
sort of things?
Yeah. I mean, I haven't based any one character on any one particular person, but they definitely make their way in. I mean, certainly. I mean, sometimes. Yeah, in my mind, that's what they look like. They look like this person. But yeah, I think their character traits and quirks and little things like that make it in, but usually like a mix of people and characters. So, yeah. How about you? Have you written about any characters in your real life?
Oh, no.
You're like, not that I will admit to.
Yeah. Allison?
Yeah.
As a former journalist who also made that transition, what sparked your decision to move to longer form and longer deadlines from, that sort of more frantic
Yes.
pace?
I think it was this workshop that I'm in, this writing workshop that I'm in. I think it was like the idea that I didn't necessarily make a decision like I'm going to write a novel and I'm going to get it published. I just was in this writing workshop and I would just write 7 pages and then I'd write the next 7 pages.
So are you still doing some freelance, like shorter form, or just
No,
this now? Right,
Just as
okay.
well. Yeah. Yeah, there's not enough hours. in
But
the
it's
day.
very good training for, the discipline,
The discipline
and
for sure, yeah.
collaboration with an editor. I think it was very helpful.
Yes.
It's not surprising that you were able to do that.
Yeah. And people say like, oh my gosh, how do you write like a whole novel? How do you have the inspiration to sit down? I'm like, you don't wait for the inspiration necessarily. I wait until I've dropped the kids off at school and then I sit in front of the computer and I force myself to write. And sometimes some of it will come out really crappy, but at least I've got something on the page and then it's something that I can work with. So, you can't always wait for the muse, right?
No.
You just gotta work with the hours that you have and then you have something to shape and mold once you have words on the page. So I don't sort of give myself that pressure. Like it has to be perfect first time it's on the page.
So I was struck when you said, where do I want to live in my imagination for the next year and a half? Is that kind of how you start your process, or does it vary with different books? And kind of, if you could tell us what your process is.
Yeah, I mean, it does because I'm going to be working with this and with these characters for a long time. And it's like, you don't want to start something and be stuck with something you're not interested in. But my process as far as coming up with an idea and how do I start is, for me, it's been place every time. So Montauk, set in the 1930s, but I lived in New York City and I had a place in Montauk and I loved Montauk. Do you guys know Montauk? It's a little town at the tip of Long Island. And when I was going there, it was like a little, very down-to-earth little fishing village. And everyone wanted to go to the Hamptons, but they didn't want to drive the extra half hour to get out to Montauk. But then by the time I left New York, it was like very, very cool. And, a lot of the mom and pop shops had sold out and these fancy restaurants. And you couldn't get a reservation. You have like plate of pasta for $50. And it just became very cool. And so I just felt that I was nostalgic for the way it used to be. And I wanted to write about how it used to be back in the day. So that's how the story started. I mean, that's not what it's all about, but that's how the story started, was the idea of a place. And then even with the showgirl, that started with the idea of a place. It started with this place in the Adirondacks. I actually had written an article for a travel magazine about this great camp in the Adirondacks. And it was like the great camps that were owned by the Vanderbilts and the Rockefellers. They used to have they called them rustic retreats, but there was nothing rustic about them. They were up in the woods on these lakes, but there were these huge compounds that their families would go to on vacation. And one of them had been preserved and turned into a hotel called The Point, where you could stay for like $2,000 a night. And I had written this article about this hotel. And then I learned that there were other camps up in the Adirondacks from these wealthy families. And I just thought that would make an interesting book. I was like, it could be like a murder or a drowning or something, something. So I went and stayed at one of them, not the $2,000 a night one, like a more modest one. And I thought, oh, this would be cool. And I took a tour with a local historian, and he's telling me all about the architecture and about this and that. And I was like, yeah, but where's the story? And then he's like, oh yeah, and the owner of this one, his wife was a Ziegfeld Folly. And she used to like bring all of her theater friends out here for like these elaborate parties. And she used to insist that nobody should they would go hiking, but she'd insist that nobody should go more than 500 feet without a drink in their hand. So she would set up bar carts along the hiking trails. And I was like, that's my girl right there. So the whole story became about this woman who wants to become a Ziegfeld Folly. And yeah, they go up to the Adirondacks and they stay at one of these camps, but that ended up not being the main part of the story. But it started again with this place, and the same with Laguna. So I think, yeah.
And now Balboa.
I'm so predictable.
Not really. I would say no. Any other questions?
Yeah.
You go first.
So I've read the first two. I haven't read Laguna yet, and I get so attached to a book, right? When it ends, I'm so sad. Are you sad to say goodbye to your characters before you start fresh in your new book?
Yeah, I mean, there is a sense of completion where you're like, it feels well-rounded and everything. But yes, I mean, definitely. Especially now that I'm promoting the book and I'm doing all these events, I'm talking about Hazel all the time. I feel like I know her. I feel like she's a friend of mine. So yeah, I definitely get attached. Yeah, they're fun.
This cover is just
Mm-hmm.
everything. I just can't say it. Every time I see it, I just love it. Did you have any input at all in the cover, or did the publisher involve you, or they just said, bam, check it out?
They pretty much just said bam. Yeah. I mean, I had sent them pictures of the hotel, because the hotel is this iconic building right in town, and it's been around since the 1930s, and like Hollywood's elite used to go there, and Humphrey Bogart and Lauren Bacall used to go there. So there's all this story about the hotel. So I did think that the hotel was somehow going to make it onto the cover. But they came up with it, and do you want to know the truth?
Yeah.
Originally, her hair was covering her face completely. You couldn't see her face, and I showed it to my family. I showed it to my son, who's 13, and he's like, she looks like Chewbacca. And then there was like a profile, like a nose and a mouth. I was like, oh my gosh, okay, well, we can't have that, because that's all I'm going to see now.
Yeah.
So I did tell the publisher that, and I said, my son says she looks like Chewbacca. So they made her, I don't know how, they moved her hair and made her profile
Good
face.
call.
Yeah.
Now, the hotel pictures, you going to put that on your website too?
Yes, I like all these ideas.
She should hire you.
I know.
Hey,
I'm
I'll
available.
open.
Yeah, I think they're good ideas.
All right. Well, thank you so much for coming.
Great.
Nicola's here to sign your books. Please shop.
Thank you. Thanks so much. Good questions.
Okay. Great. Done. Sold.